Hello and welcome back. This episode is focused on the third module out of the 4 modules in the program here at Starfish Social Club. So if you missed any of the previous modules, you are welcome to go back to previous episodes where you can see everything that I do in module 1, which is called identity. It's all about helping kiddos figure out and establish and learn how to create the reputation they want for themselves. And module 2, which is awareness, where we are learning and building and growing our social awareness skills. This is module 3. Students can start the program at any point. They don't have to start at module 1, but the modules do build upon each other. Module 3 is called engagement, and it is probably the one that gets the most interest because it's all about conversations. And as we know, kiddos who struggle with social skills, conversations are probably the most obvious way that this shows up. Is that we notice our kiddos maybe don't know how to engage in conversations with their peers. Maybe they are very outgoing and social, but they maybe monopolize conversations. Maybe they don't know how to start a conversation in a socially appropriate way. Maybe they don't know how to end a conversation. Maybe conversations just end up being what I sometimes refer to as a download, with them just downloading information instead of an actual conversation. So this third module tends to be the one that gets the most interest from parents. But I would say, depending on what time of year it is, this is the module that I teach live from January to March. So any other time of the year, I would definitely recommend jumping in wherever we are, as opposed to waiting for this module, because wherever we are in the program, kiddos learn and grow and benefit. And all the modules, there's a little bit of carryover from all 4 modules throughout the entire year. I want to start talking about this module by describing something that I think is really crucial in this module and with our kids in general. And it's something that I really just became consciously aware of in the last couple months. And as I've become consciously aware of it, I've really recognized how much it affects our kids and me. And it is the distinction between an informational conversation and a social conversation. I've been teaching this to kids for several years, and we talk about the difference between the two. An informational conversation is basically when the goal is for one person to get an answer to a question, basically. The examples that I give the kids are, if you ask mom what's for dinner, asking dad what time you're leaving to go to school, asking somebody in the store where the video game section is, asking somebody in a restaurant, does it come with fries? These are just informational questions and informational interactions. And because of that, they're not actually a conversation. It's one person trying to get information. And then once we get the information, that's usually the end of the interaction. Social conversations, the intention is for people to connect and learn more about each other. If you think about the purpose of conversations, we are seeking similarities. We are looking for what I call common or shared interests, because when we can find common or shared interests with other people, it helps us bond and connect to them, and it creates topics of conversation that we can always come back to. So that's really the goal of social conversations, is we're looking for connection, we're looking for commonality. I have a kiddo that I'm working with right now, one-on-one, and he has really great social conversation skills. He's very engaging. He does a really good job of asking questions, making comments, maintaining conversations. He's genuinely interested in other people. He's a really, really great personality. And his mom was sharing some information from one of his teachers, basically saying that in school, when the teacher would ask him a question, or when he was offering information in class, he would kind of go and go and go and ramble until everybody kind of got tired of listening to him. And so, you know, I had an email from the teacher kind of asking, you know, how we could support him, and mom was, you know, this is the dilemma in school. And it made me realize that this student's brain is wired for social conversations. And so what's happening is when he's in a situation where it is an informational expectation, like a classroom for us older people, and a work environment, a meeting, he's not able to switch into informational conversation mode. And that was the first time I had really recognized that. I've always known the difference and I teach the difference, but it was the first time it had really become clear to me that this kiddo who functions in social conversation mode doesn't know yet how to function in informational conversation mode. So that's part of what we're working on right now, is I'm helping him understand the difference and understand how to assess the context of the situation to determine whether it's an informational communication or a social communication. And it's not even about the person you're talking to, because if you think about a parent and a child, you guys have both types of conversations. You may ask your child, did they finish eating dinner? What time do they need to be at soccer practice? Those are informational communications. You're not looking for a story. You're not looking for an elaborate connective answer. You're just looking for information. Versus when a parent asks a child, what are you learning in math this week? Or what was the best part of your day today? Now you're looking for engagement and connection. So it's not so black and white where it depends on the person we're talking to. It depends on the context, on the situation. And that's what we all have to be able to analyze. And the interesting thing is, since working with this student, I have really become very aware that my brain is wired for informational interactions. I am already very aware that I am a black and white communicator. I'm a pretty straightforward communicator. I am aware that because of this, I can come across as blunt. And my intention is never to come across as rude or disrespectful or uninterested or anything like that. But I am an informational communicator. When I'm engaging with someone, most of the time my goal is just to get the information. And so I really have to put a lot of thought and effort into social communication. And sometimes I miss I miss that. And even as I'm recording this, the day before I'm recording this, I had posted something in a Facebook group, and my intention was, I was noticing people talking about something in this group and they were using the wrong terminology, which normally doesn't really matter, but this is a group for women with ADHD who are entrepreneurs. And the terminology they were misusing has to do with having a differently wired brain. There are neurodivergent and neurodivergence don't mean the same thing, and people keep using them interchangeably. And so I just made a post. I had jumped in on and commented on a couple people's posts recently and just really, friendly pointed out, hey, I think you mean this word instead of this word. One of them was a woman's business card. Like I feel like she would want that to be, using correct terminology. And when I pointed it out to her, she was, thankful that I had pointed it out to her, and she changed it. So I just made a post in the group and, just letting everybody know, hey guys, I see that a lot of you guys are using this word and I feel like you mean this word. And I said, I know like it doesn't seem like it might be that big of a deal, because I knew that people would think I might be being, petty and semantic and whatever. And I said, but we're talking about running businesses here. And so I think it's important, no matter what industry you're in, that you're using the correct terminology for what you do. And I got so much negative feedback over that post. I had people telling me I was being really disrespectful, people telling me I was like, who am I to come into this group and tell people how they should be talking? And it was an overwhelming amount of negative feedback about this post I made. My only intention was to be helpful. I was trying to point out something that I noticed people were doing that, again, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, I would think that people would want to make sure they're using the correct terminology. And the feedback doesn't bother me. These are random people on the internet, but I did end up deleting the post because it just wasn't well received. There were people who were liking it and loving it, and a couple people commented that they realized they had been doing that, and so they went back and changed. So I could definitely tell there were people who found the benefit in it, but I think that struck me as an example of how I was trying to engage in an informational conversation, and social media is social. I mean, that it's in the name. So I think it was the way that I was communicating, because again, I'm a pretty blunt, black and white person. And it just helped me realize that I think everybody defaults to either informational communication style or social communication style. And so it's difficult for, I think, most of us to be able to do both really effectively. I even, in some groups I'm in, I see people post having issues on both sides. I see people post about how they hate small talk, they have issues meeting new people, they have issues maintaining relationships. These are adults in groups that I'm in. And then I've seen somebody post that in a job interview, the people that were interviewing her told her that she was talking too much, that she was giving way too much information on the questions that they were asking her. And so I can see that some of us are wired for informational conversations, and we struggle with adapting to more social conversations when the expectation is more storytelling, more engagement, more interaction. And some of us are wired for social interactions, and we struggle more with informational interactions, where the expectation is that we're kind of clear and concise, and we answer the question that was asked, we give the information that was asked for, without the storytelling and the elaboration that is expected in a social context. So there's my backstory for this module, that has really just come about lately. I think most people who are autistic especially are wired for informational interactions. Autism tends to come with very black and white thinking, kind of, that People with autism are more likely to be known for struggling to use their filter, just kind of saying whatever they're thinking. So I think people with autism, autistic people, are much more likely to struggle with social conversations. And I think people with ADHD can go either way. I think some people with ADHD are extremely outgoing and social and friendly, and then struggle to just give the information that was requested. And then some of us, like me, are black and white and blunt, and sometimes struggle to communicate things in a way that's more friendly and engaging. So this is where all of this kind of comes together, and we work a bit on both. We do primarily focus on social because that's where most of the students struggle, and this is Starfish Social Club. So let me tell you about the 8 weeks of the engagement module, now that we have that background in place. I structured the 8 weeks in what I feel like are the easiest conversational skills to the most difficult. So they don't flow in terms of how a conversation would flow and what skills you would need, to start a conversation all the way to ending a conversation. They don't flow in chronological order, if you will. I teach them starting with what I think is the easiest and then building from there. Week 1 is where we work on joining a group conversation. This is a conversation that other people started, and we decide we want to join. This is pretty difficult for a lot of our kids. Number 1, because they don't know what to say. Number 2, sometimes our kids have been given strategies and suggestions for joining a conversation that are actually counterproductive, like being told, just go introduce yourself, like being told, go ask them what they're talking about. Please do not teach your child either one of those strategies. Those both actually make things more awkward. So joining a conversation, the other thing that I recognize is that when kids think about joining a conversation, they often are focused on who is in that group as opposed to what they're talking about. So that's one of the big things I teach in this week is focus on what the group is talking about, regardless of who's in the group. Because if your goal is to join a group conversation because of the people who are in the group, you may have zero interest in what they're actually talking about. And that would be kind of pointless to join that conversation when you don't care at all what they're talking about, versus joining a different conversation where you might not know people, but you have a lot to contribute, or you're really interested in what they're talking about. And for those of us who are adults, if you think about natural social interactions that happen out in the real world, I join conversations very often with strangers. Out in the world, I tend to be a pretty social person when I choose to be. And I very often will hear people talking about something and I will join that conversation. And so it's much more important to focus on what people are talking about and for it to be something that we feel like we can add value to or learn something from, as opposed to focusing on who is having that conversation. That's week 1. I teach the kids different points in that concept of joining conversation. So we talk about how do you listen to what people are talking about without being weird and awkward. That's one of the things we cover. We also cover what to say when you're joining a conversation. And I'll give you guys my biggest tip on that is I teach the kids to join a conversation by making a comment, not asking a question. Because when we ask a question, someone in the group has to stop talking to answer our question. And we're not even part of the conversation yet. And we've just caused this whole conversation to have to stop. So I teach the students to join conversations by making a comment, not asking a question. And this is where our kiddos who are more social have a little bit of a hard time sometimes, is because I just want them to make one comment that's a phrase or a sentence, not jumping into someone else's conversation and telling a story, because it's not your conversation. So our kids who are more social struggle with that a bit, is that they want to jump in and start, telling their story about what the group is talking about. But we haven't even been accepted into this conversation yet. So instead, we're just going to make a comment or say a phrase or a sentence about what the group is talking about. And then we're going to see what happens next. They're either going to accept us into the conversation or they're not. So in this first week, we also learn a strategy for what to do if we try to join a conversation and it's not successful. We learn a strategy for how to remove ourselves from that situation and save face a little bit. Week 2 is maintaining a conversation. One of the big points here is that what I see students do sometimes, especially kids who are more social, but maybe don't have conversation skills intact yet, is they will ask a bunch of questions like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite video game? Where's your favorite place to eat? But that's not actually a conversation. That's an interview. Even if both people are asking questions, that's an interview, because there's no topic, there's no flow. It's just random question after random question. So this is definitely a good starting point for kids who are learning to talk to other people, is to ask a bunch of random questions in a row. It's definitely a step above not engaging with other kids, but it's not actually a conversation. In week 2, we work on how do you maintain a conversation? How do you keep it on topic? How do you keep it going back and forth? I teach the students 4 different strategies they can use, and they get to decide what they want to do. They get to decide which one they feel like they like the best, or which one they feel like they're the most comfortable with. And then that's the one they get to do. And as they become more comfortable with it, then they can add on others if they want to. So I'll share with you guys, in my opinion, the easiest one is what I call the boomerang strategy. And it is simply when someone asks you a question and you answer it, you ask them the same question back. It seems like it's a pretty, what's a good word? Obvious strategy, but it's not for our kids. What often happens with our kids is someone will ask them a question and they'll answer it, and then everybody just kind of sits there and nobody really knows what to say next. That's actually pretty typical. So the boomerang strategy helps them get the conversation to go back and forth, asking them the same question they asked you. And we also talk about sometimes we have to change the question a little bit to make sure it's appropriate for the other person. For example, if mom asks you, how was your day at school? You wouldn't ask her the same question back, but we talk about how could you change that question to make it appropriate to ask mom. So that's week 2. I shared with you guys one of the strategies I teach in week 2. There are 4 that I teach the kids for maintaining a conversation. And we practice every week during this module. They get to practice. They get to choose another student in the group, or during the beginning of the module, they can also choose me. And we practice these conversational skills. Week 3 of our engagement module is changing the topic. We talk about why we might want to change the topic. Usually it's because we are kind of done talking about the topic. It could be because the topic is getting a little maybe inappropriate, something we don't really want to keep talking about. Also, recognizing when other people are no longer interested in our topic. So that's a big part of week 3 as well, is how do you recognize when other people are no longer interested? And then our strategy is to change the topic. So we can change the topic just because, we feel like we want to talk about something else, or we can change the topic because we notice no one else is interested anymore. So there's a different strategy depending on why we're changing the topic. One of the strategies I teach for kids changing the topic is this is that we practice this because it's hilarious. You can say, I know this is off topic, but, and then you can say anything as long as it's appropriate for your audience. And so I let the kids practice this because they really get a kick out of saying really goofy stuff. I know this is off topic, but one time I shoved a penny up my nose, right? Like, and the point is, as long as you acknowledge you're changing the topic, it's usually fine. It's when we don't acknowledge it that it makes it seem like we weren't paying attention. It makes us seem a little bit rude. If the group is talking about their pets and we start talking about what we had for dinner, it makes it seem like we're kind of rude, we're annoying, we weren't paying attention. But if you just say, I know this is off topic, but you can say pretty much anything. So we practice that one because everybody loves it. And then what we do is we have a group conversation and every student gets to practice changing the topic. So that's week 3. Week 4 is 2 concepts that are similar and can go together, but they're also a little bit different. The first one is the concept of social filter. And that is pretending that we have an imaginary filter in our brain. We talk about what a filter is. The kids come up with examples of filters like a coffee filter, a water filter, a pool filter, an air conditioning filter. So we talk about what the purpose of a filter is. And then we talk about how a social filter is this imaginary thing in our brain that holds back the thoughts that might hurt somebody's feelings or maybe give us a reputation for being rude or mean. And it lets through the thoughts that would be totally appropriate to come out of our mouth as words. Part of this is also working on, a lot of our kids can get a reputation for complaining. And really it's because they're saying what they think, but because they don't know how to use their filter and change the words that come out of their mouth, they sound rude. So we work on that in this lesson as well. We work on complaining. And one of the things I teach the kids is that complaining is when your voice sounds like a song. We talk about whining. So when your voice sounds like this, when it sounds like a song and it's going up and down, that's whining. And when people talk with a whiny voice, it sounds like complaining. And so, of course, we all get to practice. We all get to practice using our whiny voice, but it helps the kids recognize that concept. It helps them understand the difference between their regular voice and a whiny voice. And then part of this lesson is that everybody gets to talk about something they complain about sometimes. And we talk about how we can change that from creating a problem to solving a problem. So my main example is if you are at home or in class at school and you are really warm. Instead of complaining about it, saying something like, it's really hot in here, you can become a problem solver and you can say something like, can we please turn the fan on? Okay, so going from complaining to problem solving. And a lot of the kids, they really grasp that concept and it becomes very helpful for them because again, they're not intending to come across like they're complaining. But when they say things, they're stating the complaint, which basically means they're creating a problem instead of stating a solution. So that's part of the lesson as well. And then the second part of this lesson is we talk about social fake. Social fake is when we pretend for the sake of our reputation. And not all of the students like this, and that's totally fine. A big point at Starfish Social Club is the kids can implement the strategies they like, and they don't have to implement the ones they don't like. We are all different people with different brains. I just want to make sure they know how to if they choose to use those strategies. So social fake is things like paying attention to things that somebody that we're having a conversation with is talking about. Even in school, pretending like we're paying attention. We all do that. None of us pay attention all the time. It's a really helpful skill to learn how to pretend like we're paying attention. Pretending, a big thing that we talk about this week is the concept of being anxious or uncomfortable in a situation, but how we still can pretend like things are okay. Not meaning a situation where we should be anxious or uncomfortable, but for example, going to a party that we've been invited to. It's really normal to feel anxious and uncomfortable in doing something like that. But if we put a smile on our face and we put some effort into talking to other people, it completely changes the way that people perceive us. So that's a big part of social fake is we do not social fake to do anything that would be detrimental to us or to other people. We do not social fake in any way that would be harmful or unkind to anybody else. But we might want to consider the social fake, even, something like at our birthday, when grandma gives us a present that we don't really care about, right? That's a great example of a time to do the social fake. And we also talk about things like at dinner. Maybe you guys are having something for dinner that you don't really like. That goes back to what could you say that would solve a problem instead of creating a problem? So something like, thank you for making dinner, Mom. Next time, can you please maybe not make this one again? Or I like it better when we have this, right? Something like that. Next time, could you make it with chicken instead of beef? So we're trying to work on a social filter as that buffer between what we think and how we feel and what comes out of our mouth. And then social fake that just helps us create the reputation that we want. Even things like if somebody that we are trying to be friends with is telling jokes, they might not be that funny, but we can do our pretend laugh, right? It's a social fake. Most people do a pretend laugh for other people. That's a social fake. Most people pretend like we're interested in things even when we aren't, for the benefit of other people. So that's the point of social fake. And again, not everybody likes it. Not everybody wants to do it. And that's totally fine. But it's definitely easier to get along with other people when we can do things like pretend that what they're interested in is something that we want to talk about. It definitely helps us get along with other people better. Week 5 is leaving a conversation. We talk about leaving a conversation because there's a reason we need to go. Maybe the bell just rang and it's time to go to class. maybe the activity that they're in, Boy Scouts or dance class is over and it's time to go. So that's one scenario we talk about, is how to leave when there's a reason that somebody needs to leave. And then the other one is just when it's a little more casual, but we're kind of just ready to go. So we talk about, some of our kids don't know how to end a conversation. And so you might see things like there's just kind of this awkward silence and nobody's saying anything, and it's just kind of awkward. You might see, kids being like, okay, bye. Sometimes kids will actually just walk away. I will add to this that I think electronic communication makes leaving a conversation in real life even more difficult, because if you're texting with somebody or you're messaging with somebody on social media, you actually can not end that conversation. A lot of times conversations just kind of fade away electronically. They might not have an actual end to them. And so I think when kids are growing up in the world of texting and social media, they might not even have that concept in terms of a real in-person conversation, that there needs to be a closure to this conversation. So that's week 5, is leaving a conversation, what we say and what we do if there's a reason that we need to leave, and what we say and what we do if we're just kind of ready to go. We also talk about, we reiterate from week 1 how to leave a conversation if we weren't accepted into it, if we tried to join and it didn't work. So we touch on that one again. Week 6 is initiating a conversation. So this goes all the way on week 6 because it's difficult. This is a difficult thing to do. In week 6, we talk about initiating a conversation with people we know and with people we don't know, because a really important concept for me is I am not a fan of stranger danger. And I talk about this a lot. So if you've been around for a while, you've heard me talk about this before. Here's the reality. And I wouldn't say this to the students, but the reality is strangers are not very likely to cause harm to other strangers. When you hear stories about that, it's very, very isolated situations. The reality is that people who know each other are much more likely to harm each other than strangers. So what ends up happening is when we double down on stranger danger, our kids who are Black and white have such a hard time recognizing that sometimes that person's totally fine to talk to. It also can become a safety issue when they need help, or if they're in a situation where there's not anybody they know that they can talk to. So it can actually put them in a more dangerous situation than if we teach them how to talk to strangers and how to evaluate strangers, right? Let's look at people and let's see what some clues are that this may be a good person to ask for help, for example. So in week 6, I teach the students how to initiate a conversation with somebody that you know, not something generic like, hey, what's up? Or how's it going? Those aren't actually conversations. So how can we start a conversation with somebody that we know? And how can we start a conversation with somebody that we don't know? How can we have a conversation with the new kid that's sitting next to us on the bus that we've never met before? How can we have a conversation with this partner we've just been assigned to in our geography class that we don't actually know? How can we have a conversation with somebody in a group that we're in and we've never met them before? When we're older and we're in college and we have jobs, how can we initiate conversations with people in our environment, but that we don't actually know? That's such an important skill if we want our kids to be able to make friends. So in my opinion, our kids are going to have a really hard time making friends if we are drilling down stranger danger, because then to them, everybody they don't know is somebody they should not be talking to. And the older they get, the more that will really interfere with their ability to make connections with other people. All right, that's my soapbox for stranger danger. Week 7 is electronic communication. We talk texting, social media, email. Some of the things that I cover in this week are things like acknowledging electronic communication. So, if mom sends a message saying, hey, I'm on my way home, acknowledge it, acknowledging electronic communication. Knowing that anything we put out there electronically can be saved, can be screenshotted, can be forwarded. So paying a lot of attention to what we're saying in a text message, on social media, in an email, just being really mindful of what we're choosing to put out there electronically. I also talk to the kids who are a little bit older about social media and the importance of things being set to private and being very aware of who we accept as a friend. And that somebody that we don't know and have no connection to, there's no reason for us to quote unquote friend them on social media. And I think that the fact that social media uses the term friend, I think is really misleading for our kids. Most of us understand the difference, that a connection on social media is not, most of them are not our friends. They're our acquaintances. Sometimes they're not even an acquaintance of ours. But I think for our kids, because they're called friends, that line gets very blurry. And so I do try to enforce some safety protocols around things like that. That if somebody sends you a friend request and you don't know who they are, there's no reason to accept that. And again, keeping profiles set on private. We talk about using our social filter when we're communicating electronically. We do an activity this week where I will give an example of something that somebody might say and then ask the group whether they should post that on social media, send it in a text message, or keep it in their brain. And so we do an activity like that as well. And then week 8 is asking for help. I actually added this week after I created this curriculum because I recognized both from working with the kids and from conversations with parents that this is something that, number one, a lot of the kids struggle with, and number two, it's so important. So asking for help, we talk about who to ask for help. And the main point of that is you can talk to anybody about anything that's going on that you may be struggling with or having a hard time with. But when it comes to asking for help, we need to ask the people who can actually help us for help. And one of the examples I gave is a couple of years ago, I had a student at Starfish who was telling his mom that he didn't like the games that were available during game time. But his mom doesn't work at Starfish Social Club. So all his mom can do is relay that information to me. But she also told him he needed to talk to me about it. So it's a great example. You can tell mom and dad anything and everything. Please tell mom and dad anything and everything. But when it comes to asking for help, if you need help with something at Starfish, that's me. If you need help with something in your English class, that's your English teacher, right? There could be things at school where it might be your school counselor or your school principal. If you have a job, maybe you're having an issue with your schedule or your coworkers, that's your boss. So you can talk to anybody about anything that you choose to, but when it comes to asking for help, we need to make sure that we're asking the people who are in a position to actually help with that thing. We also talk about how to ask for help. We talk about when to ask for help, and we practice and role play asking for help. We talk about different scenarios and who might be someone appropriate to ask for help in that situation. We talk about the difference between needing help at some point versus needing help now, and how those situations can be handled differently as well. That is the 8 weeks of our engagement module. And as I mentioned, this is what I teach live from January to March. So if you are, students can come in at any time throughout the year. They just jump into whatever module we are on at that time. So January to March, we do engagement. That is the third module, just from the way they naturally flow. And like I said, it tends to be one of the most popular. It's also really helpful for the kids to have the two modules that come before it, because they help give some context and some base skills before we jump into conversations. I will see you on the next solo episode for module 4, which is all about relationships, friendships, all acquaintances, all kinds of relationships. That's what we'll talk about for module 4. So thank you for hanging out. I am really glad that you're here. And in 2 weeks on the next solo episode, we'll talk all about module 4. So I will see you again next week.